Job. So Sonto, I'm going to hand over to you. Okay. My name is Sonto. I am this is muted. Is that better? Yes, I think so. It should be fine now. Sorry about that. Is that working now, Sonto? Kitty? Okay. It's better. All right. Okay. Hi, sorry, it's the names. Good morning, everyone. So today I'll be speaking about youth-led participatory action research, also known as YPI. So this method was inspired by my own PhD work. I worked with adolescents in Soweto, and this is one of the methods that I used. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Just going to that your screen. Yeah. So this is where I am. Yeah. If you make it full screen, there are like muted arrows at the bottom that you can use. On current slide. I think it's my computer. Yeah. Let's see if I can take. If you see if you can be to. Yeah, let's give control to Jenny. Mm-hmm. Email it to me. Okay.
some tech issues this morning, but it should be back and running.
Yeah, the second slide.
Second slide. There
yes. Sorry about that. Okay, so the youth-led participatory action research is a methodology that empowers young people to actively engage in research processes that involve issues that affect them directly in their communities. So such issues could be related to health, like sexual and reproductive health, or mental health, or community safety. So this method aims to use innovative approaches to promote healthy development of young people. In this case, it draws on the expertise of young people as they conduct research and improve conditions that support healthy development. From the research that I've done, this method is usually used in low-income communities to try and improve and develop the young people there. Okay.
Yep. What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you have to contribute?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So next slide. So it works by actively involving young people in identifying issues, in identifying and addressing issues that affect them. So instead of going to the community with, an idea of, or having an idea based on what you've read on what the issues are, you go to the community, to the young people in communities, and you ask them what their issues are. So you ask them to identify the issues that they have in their communities. So young people play an active role. So in this case, they are researchers instead of being subjects or participants, or you can call them co-researchers working with the PI, the primary investigator in conducting research. It's also rooted in empowerment, so it aims to amplify the voices and perspectives of young people who are often marginalized or excluded from decision-making. Also, it works well with adolescents. So adolescents find themselves in a tricky position where they are not really children, but they are not fully adults too. So this is a phase where they are trying to find their voice and giving them this opportunity to be active participants in any issue that affects their community. It gives them a voice and an opportunity to be heard. And this allows them then to find their voice because it's something that they're trying to establish in the developmental stage that they are in. So by doing this, taking this approach, it rebalances power, rebalances power in terms of, adults and children. So it sort of like places them in the same position. It benefits the community and also gives the bigger picture instead of doing research based on what you've read, but doing research that is inspired by the community.
Such a position of responsibility already. So some of them are heading up households. Some of them are, like from experience when I did research at an HIV clinic, a lot of them were going to the clinic by themselves, were kind of almost managing their own condition, even as adolescents. And so in a way, I guess that's also recognizing that they also have a lot of agency, and more so than what you would expect in other country contexts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Please. Yes. So it has positive impact at different levels. We have an impact at the socio-ecological level. So at this level, it supports positive youth development as well as psychological empowerment. For example, when I was reading on this method, I came across an article that was published in 2021. So it's one of the few studies in South Africa that uses this method. It was conducted at a rural school. So one of the issues that were raised by the learners at the school was their need for sports grounds and clean sanitary facilities, which they didn't have. And by doing this, the learners at the school were able to also, because they were given now a voice, they saw that they can be heard, and they started a debate society, if I may call it that. They started a debate which went on to the national levels, and they had an opportunity to go overseas as a debating team. Yeah.
So it opens up huge opportunities potentially beyond the research.
Yes.
I guess because it's so fundamentally empowering.
Yes. It's also an intervention into the settings and systems that shape youth development. It's mostly used in health and education. So it engages youth as experts or co-researchers, like I said before, disrupting the standard about who has expertise to create knowledge about young people. So not the adults in their lives or the researcher. Slides. So how does this what effect does this method has on youth? So the first one is empowerment. It empowers youth by giving them a voice on issues that directly affect them. So through active participation, young people, they gain confidence, a sense of agency, and the belief that their actions can make a difference in their community. And I think I saw this through the example of the article that I read with the school where they started a debating team.
Something quite small.
Yeah.
And quite easy to start. Doesn't require money. It doesn't require any kind of particular resources.
Yes. Next slide. It also allows youth to develop their ability to think critically about the world around them and become more informed and discerning citizens. So they are able to think critically about the issues that affect them. For example, in my research that I was doing in Soweto, my research is on mental health, adolescent mental health. And when we started talking about mental health, they said to me, they never used to talk about mental health. It's something that they see amongst themselves, but they never actually, talked about it with either family or their peers. And having opened the floor or given them an opportunity to sit and talk in focus group discussions, they were able to, engage and talk about mental health, which they actually said that they didn't have the vocabulary for mental health. It's something that they knew, but because they never talked about it, they didn't have the vocabulary or the right words to use.
Things like, crazy people.
Yeah.
Like that's all that they could talk about was people that they'd seen were crazy.
Yeah.
And they couldn't really talk about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they couldn't really talk about the everyday, like I'm feeling sad or I'm just having a down kind of a day. That when you were talking about mental health, that was kind of extreme, and that's all that they really.
Yeah. I mean, that popular culture now of name it to tame it.
Yeah.
That sort of catchphrase that you've got to have the vocabulary, and you've got to have specific vocabulary in order to to almost know what you're dealing with and then find the solution.
That's lovely.
Yeah. In a podcast.
Yeah. It also gives young people a sense of belonging. So it provides a supportive environment where young people can share their experiences, their perspectives, and aspirations with others, with similar backgrounds. Next slide. Yeah, the next one after that. Okay. And it also has long-term impact. So it can influence their attitudes, their behaviors, and aspirations well into the future. So the skills that they learn can be applied to different areas of their life. For example, they can, when they're adults, they can become active community members who are able to speak on issues that are affecting the community. So it has many benefits, but these are the 3 benefits that I chose to focus on. One of them is authentic understanding of youth experiences. So it allows the researcher to gain authentic experience and perspectives and needs around young people. So in this type of research, the experiences of young people are central to the investigation. So ideally, the researcher, instead of finding a topic and wanting to investigate that topic, they go into the community and they will get the topic from the community. The second benefit is contextualized knowledge. So it emphasizes the importance of understanding youth development within the context of their communities, cultures, and social environments. And the last one is enhanced methodological rigor. So here it encourages the use of innovative and participatory action research that goes beyond the traditional approaches of the researcher being at the top, and then the young people just being the subjects of research. Okay. Last slide, yeah. So these methods hold a significant promise to addressing the unique challenges faced by young people. So particularly in South Africa, this method hasn't been used a lot. And this can be because it can be financially costly. Also keeping young people in one, or bringing together young people in one environment can be tricky. The few studies where they used this method, they had a high dropout rate. And I'm assuming that the school one was successful because it was one environment where young people, I mean, they were going to school every day, so it was easy to find them. Unlike in other context where they were using community centers, inviting young people to come. And then others would drop out along the way because it's also a long-term, it works in long-term research.
So I'm so interested about that because usually you find that you target the youth because you can find them in one place, like a school.
Yeah.
So I'm so interested that actually that's not the case.
Yeah.
And perhaps because schools are not interested, because I remember with the EMS, they said, we always target children because we're hoping that the information will filter down to the parents because it's a captive audience. There's time during the school day to actually intervene, but perhaps schools are getting very careful about who they allow into their space.
And they're quite sticky now about not wanting any interference with
and the POPI, I'm sure, doesn't help either. It's more recent. Yeah.
So I was wondering, Sonta, on that point, if you want to share a bit, like what actually worked and what didn't work in terms of your project, because you had quite a unique scenario there with kids coming to a particular venue.
Yeah. So I think in my case, what helped is that the young people or adolescents in Soweto were already coming to the Jabulani sports center for other activities, like the boys, for example, they wouldn't come if they didn't have soccer practice. So that means that I had to schedule the focus groups to the days when they had soccer practice. Then they would come join the focus group discussions. And outside of that, they wouldn't come.
You struggle to get mail.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
you get loads
Doesn't
of
surprise me.
girls and not
Yeah.
many boys.
yeah, yeah.
And had to then kind of shift and think, well, how could you attract them?
Yeah, and one of the ways was choosing to be there on days when they had soccer practice.
But did you find that your participation was quite stable because you did a couple of activities and research tasks?
Yes. Yes. So I had, I would say that about 70% of my participants were involved in phase 1, 2, and 3. Mostly the
Awesome.
ladies. Mostly the ladies, and with the boys, I would get someone new with every phase. Because I don't know, maybe they were invited by a friend. But surprisingly, after every session, what they kept on saying is that we need more of this. We need something like this. So it was like something they didn't know that they needed. One of them was like, maybe we should have a group like this where you come and then we just sit and talk. I noticed that there's I don't know if I should call it desperation, but a very strong need to speak and be heard. Because even though the topic was about mental health, one of the things that we ended up discussing the most was their relationship with the parents, particularly the girls, and how they are controlled at home, but also not being heard. Yeah.
Yeah. We've seen that in other studies as well with participants saying, can you do this again?
Yeah.
So the power of coming together.
It'd be an awesome paper, like from soccer to self-reflection.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's very important that we support and amplify the voices of young people, particularly in developing countries where, like South Africa, where we have so many social issues. Young people have a lot to say and can contribute significantly because these are some of the things that will affect their future. So it's important that they are given a voice and be heard, which I think is one of the things that they liked about the focus group discussions. Were just like someone who's there to just listen to what they have to say. I went there, the topic was mobile mental health, but we ended up talking about other things. So they prioritized their issues. Because of that, I had to take like a different route, into my research, because they will prioritize or talk about what they want to talk about, and not something that I imposed on them.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, particularly with the example of your studies, where you'd gone in with a very strong idea of what you were going to do and a strong plan about the kind of questions you were going to ask about apps to support adolescents. And what came out was, we're not even there yet, and we're on such a different level, and what the adolescents had to share was pivotal in terms of completely changing the direction of your research.
Sorry, something completely different field. Those emergency call work that we're doing. Hepburn, Wilkinson's, Butler, Mormac, Rundle, a whole lot of others. I just found the quote here. They said that local naturally evolved solutions work and they must be absorbed into common practice. And I think that so much research doesn't ask what the people on the ground are finding difficult and what they want changed. And I think we make that mistake in every field, not just research, but implementing work solutions, implementing new anything from IT systems downwards. And I think we just miss that lesson the whole time, is who's at the ground and who's doing the work, and why don't we ask them, why don't we hear their voice?
Yeah, I was just thinking,
and it's time
community engagement and our experiences at Xanthia with taking speech and audio students up there. And the particular example of, we decided that they needed a library, and it was our decision, it was our vision, and it was disastrous in reality because it wasn't what the community wanted. So it was a complete and utter shambles because it was us imposing our ideas.
Except sometimes you also have to balance that with what Santo you said, is that they didn't know they needed it. And I think that also ties in very nicely with Maria's study, that, in South Africa at the moment, we've got this almost learned helplessness, and we call it resilience, but is it, or is it just that we're kind of a bit hopeless?
But I guess the lesson from Santo's study was to be open to shifting as well. So, and it was quite a big shift as supervisors to guide you as well, and to say, well, oh, okay, this is not what we thought we were going to do. And Santo planned, like, phase 3 would be storyboarding and creating an app with the adolescents. Well, we had to scrap that whole part and think, well, what do we do differently? So then it became about, well, let's sit and talk with the adolescents around what do they envision mental health support looking like in general, not even going near an app, just in general, what do they think would be useful?
I think that's a major mind shift that we have to make as researchers. Because I typically go in there with focus, but to pivot to meet the needs of a community is actually amazing. I'm just thinking about a potential study where everybody's in terms of audiology now imposing like safe listening practices for the youth. But are the strategies that the WHO, for instance, proposed, is that relevant to the South African, or feasible to the South African context? And do kids actually worry about their hearing at this age?
Yes, and again, this disconnection between policy and what's happening on the ground. So, policy says, let's go in and roll out apps. And Santo, you'd been on that event that was organized by a local company where they were looking at app development and developing tech, and then the reality compared to what you're finding in the focus groups is so different, and so crucial in terms of your contribution to knowledge.
I also just think that's sometimes a funding issue, because funders want something concrete. So if you fund the development of an app, you're more likely to get money than if you fund a series of focus groups that have sort of no, that allow people to bring out their problems. And it ties in beautifully with my son who's just finished matric. And I'll never forget the headmaster standing up and saying, have you had a discussion with your sons about what they want? And what they think and what their goals are for matric, because you might be surprised that it's not the same as yours. And I mean, hello, that was definitely my experience. And I think it's a humbling thing, because you're scared about the youth because they haven't got this frontal cortex, they don't understand consequences, but you have to meet them where they're at, and you have to help them with what they need now. You can't impose your frontal cortex onto them, because then how do they ever learn?
Exactly.
If you trying to tell them what they need and where they should go.
Exactly.
So I think it's a very hard lesson.
Where our discussions went with Santo's project was the other supervisor, Lisa Ware, was talking about the friendship bench idea, which comes from Zim, from a psychiatrist, Dixon Chabanda, where he started benches with grandmothers who sit and just chat about mental health, and he trains them. And, maybe that's more valuable than an app. Maybe a focus group kind of idea, or together and just having a support group is more valuable.
And so like a non-judgmental space, not, you know, someone telling you what you should be doing, how you should be behaving, how you should be thinking, but just having someone like completely neutral.
Exactly.
And I was even thinking of like and then it's a lot of pressure, but possibly out of your research that there is some sort of peer support space that, you know, can maybe be set up, which I'm in terms of having other youth being able to provide a space for friends and peers to kind of come and share their struggles and that. But I mean, it would obviously need to be someone who is trained and is able to handle sort of emotive conversations and that. But
without judgment.
Yeah,
I think that's what's tricky peer to peer.
yeah,
Is that
There's a post.
but also I suppose it's not as intimidating as having sort of someone much older and you talking about stuff that they might not be able to relate to, or get, you know, and they might feel that you being more like a strict like parent rather than like just a friend. Yeah.
I mean, I think I've spoken to you about this before, but there's at the Employee Clinic, they hold an adolescent support group once a month.
Yeah.
And it's run by the social worker and adolescents. I think what they say to them, if you guys need to find your way here and then we'll give you food for the day and we'll give you money to get home. That's kind of the incentive. But you know, them also getting themselves there is like showing their commitment and willingness to be there. But it's essentially like a group support thing because they're all, you know, it's all adolescents who are coming to the HIV clinic for treatment. So they're dealing with the diagnosis of HIV and obviously how that impacts them socially and their mental health and everything. But I think it's facilitated by the social worker, and sometimes the arts therapy interns are there as well. But it's ultimately, I think, the peers supporting each other.
And also the express need for connection.
Yeah, and that's actually paramount. Yeah,
and app is standardized. Like,
It was cold. Tipping into like a void.
Yeah.
And you're being treated as, choose from the drop down menu. Stand depressed, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that was really what came out as well, is that there's so many obstacles to things like phone access. We assume that kids have access to phones. Well, no, because often the phones were used to control behavior. So, or they were shared in the home.
Yeah, or as I don't know, like a punishment tool.
Yeah.
So if you misbehave, they take away the phone, or the phone is constantly monitored.
Yeah.
Which led to the young people having to be careful about what they keep on their phones. So
Yeah, so there's no sense of privacy there. So, actually you're going to be better off in a support group where you're getting connection and where you're not having to rely on Wi-Fi and phone access.
And also, the minute you've put something on an app, it's there forever. So, there's also that thing about, the one-on-one and then it's gone. There's no records. As a parent, I would prefer that. Rather than.
Yeah, and as a parent, I guess on the other side of the coin, you don't necessarily know who's interacting with your child in that app. And, is that actually safe? And sure. So, sort of postdoc on a plate then. I think it's out some connection groups. Call them connection groups. Connection. But like the friendship bench idea, but on a larger scale with a group. So I was thinking, just to shift the conversation a bit, I was thinking a lot about ethics when I was reading this article. Because, as I said earlier, often we're dealing with adolescents who are actually quite responsible, but you've still got this whole ethical conundrum of having to get consent from parents and then learner or adolescent assent. And can you talk around some of those challenges in your project and how that actually worked? Didn't work?
So one of the problems that I faced at the beginning was getting the consent forms back.
From the parents.
Yes, from the parents. So I don't know if the problem was with the parents or the adolescent. So they would forget, like, oops, sorry, I forgot my consent form at home. Or other parents thought it was some sort of psychological intervention. Others would come to me and say that, yeah, my mom said I need this because I'm very, I'm a very naughty child. So she says this will help me. Because yeah, she saw that it's about mental health. So also I'm not sure if the parents really understood what the project was about, if they took time to read, or if the adolescent explained well what I had told them when I was distributing the consent forms. But there were no concerns about where the information is going. Most of the parents, they saw this as their child being a part of something, and they're really excited about that. And also the fact that it was happening at a facility that they visit every day for like sports, which they were really happy about, to know that they're there and not out there on the streets. Yeah.
So there was quite nice buy-in.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, and obviously there are guidelines out there for what to do when you don't have parents, guardians who you can approach for consent. The ethics around some of these kinds of methods might be tricky.
Yeah.
And certainly, my experience of being at Empolweni years ago and trying to do research with the adolescents was the doctors just said to me, you'll never get consent from parents because these kids come by themselves to get their medicines, to attend the support group.
Yeah.
So, you've got to shift and think, well, what is a better way, or what is still an ethical way of getting consent and working around some of those challenges.
What did you actually do?
So in the end, I supplied letters, like a PIS letter that they could take home. But with the hospital's guidance, and this was the head of pediatrics there, he said to me, just get assent from the adolescents themselves and then send home a letter to say that they've been part of this. Because he said, even if you phone, it's going to be such a story, you're not going to get hold of people. You're not going to get parental consent. So the reality of, what I'd said to ethics versus the reality of what had to happen was very different. And I guess, that was many years ago. So I would think about things a bit more rigorously beforehand. And I guess that's something just to flag if you are doing this kind of research, is to think,
Yes.
beforehand, well, how am I going to manage the ethics?
And it's so tricky because I feel like an ethics committee would never agree to that. But then in the same way, you end up calculating and excluding a whole group of really important people. It was similar to, I was thinking of my research in terms of video recording some of those really sensitive cases in the hospital. And I mean, in hindsight, the ethics around that was really sensitive.
Yeah. And
we ended up, Jen and I did like a whole reflective piece to say, like, well, these were unexpected things that happened in the consultation that was video recorded. But by excluding those videos or saying we're not allowed to, I have to delete that data and never talk about it, and that is also, I don't agree with that, because I think you end up marginalizing people who don't really need a voice, and you don't explore those issues for them because ethically they're so sensitive.
I think the whole thing boils down to anonymizing, because what is ethics? Ethics is protecting the identity, really, and not exploiting. So, whether you're videoing or not is not an exploitative thing in my books, as long as it's anonymous. And I think that's where it has to go, because I'm interested, at what age do children allow to give their consent? Is it 18 or 16?
Well, from 7, so from 7 you can actually do a formal consent process with them, but they're still doing assent. So it's 18 when they can give consent, but from 7 you can sit and do a formal process.
An assent. That's so interesting.
Perhaps it takes the researcher, the responsibility lies then in terms of, self-reflection, awareness, looking at those bioethical principles of like, non-maleficence, beneficence, and sort of you constantly have to go back to those principles, like when you're stuck with something in the research process, thinking, well, is this valuable? Is it, safe? Am I doing this appropriately?
And then back to the person, because some people are more comfortable than others about being part of a research. Some people
the participant.
Because some people want to be heard so desperately that they would be prepared to sacrifice some of their, privacy.
Exactly. So next one, an interesting point here, showing he said he had to leave. And he said his experience with this kind of methodology with young adults says he's always struggled with facilitating the action phase. So getting the information, input the data, but not so good at strategizing around how to use that data to affect change at the community level. So I guess that's another ethical conundrum is, well, you've got the data and now so what? And what are you going to do with it? And I guess how do you then affect that change? So that's why I would say to you, postdoc would be a nice opportunity to actually go and try out some of the methods like a connection group and just see, does that work? And then if that's proven as something effective, then potentially that could be rolled out. But I think so often we just kind of stop at the level of, well, I did my nice project and I got the data. And then nothing further.
That's the tricky bit with funders. They want a very concrete outcome and you go in with a very concrete idea of what you're going to be speaking about, what data you're going to get, and what outcome your project's going to have. And you can't with this type of research. And it's very much participant driven in terms of what the outcomes are.
Unless you do something like what Karen was suggesting, where you take existing policies and you say, well, okay, how do we test those out in the reality of what the participants have to say and what their experience is. So that's another way perhaps of doing it, is to think of the policy first and then work back from that. So I wondered if anybody else online had some comments to add. Kelly, you could see this, Alia, Talia, if you've had any experience of working with young people via these kinds of action research methods, if you had any questions or anything that you wanted to add to the discussion, please feel free to do that. Just pop a message in the chat or pop a hand up. Engage with that. Talia, go for it.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was most helpful. I'm currently doing my master's and I was actually looking at doing a past study because I'm looking at doing a workshop, etc. But I'm working with adults, and upon reviewing actually this presentation, it actually was very helpful because it made me realize that this methodology isn't actually applicable for my study necessarily, but so it gave me a better understanding of the actual PAR methodology. So thank you for that.
That's great. Thanks,
Thank you,
Talia. Do you want to tell us what you are planning on doing?
Sure. I am planning on looking at caregivers' experiences when they communicate with the residents in their ward that have both dementia and hearing loss. So there are 3 phases of data collection. I'm planning on doing a pre-workshop questionnaire, then doing a workshop, which I thought would make it a PAR element, but it's not ready because the workshop will be formulated based on what they tell me in the responses from the pre-workshop questionnaire. I'll give them a section at the end saying, if you were to have a workshop, what would you want to learn, etc. So, but ultimately, I guess I'm still designing the workshop, but it's with their input. And then afterwards to do a post-workshop questionnaire, and proceeded by that to do a focus group 2 weeks later, more as like a reflective exercise, to be like, you had the questionnaires, you had the workshops, what worked for you, what didn't. So there is still an element of, I as the researcher, I'm not entirely, I think, in control of the formation of the data, presentation, etc. It will be influenced by the caregivers, but it's not in relation to PAR, it's not a direct connection.
Yeah, it sounds, Karen was just saying it sounds more like an intervention-based study.
Yes.
Yeah, and Rona was whispering and saying, don't do questionnaires, do focus groups.
So I did want to I am doing a focus group, but the reason for doing a questionnaire is more just because of the nurses working with the residents. They're not, I'm thinking from a time point of view, I don't know how lucky I'm going to be getting at least 3 or 4 people to sit and have a discussion with me.
Yeah.
I'm trying to obviously formulate it and arrange it with the home that it won't interfere with the caregiver's work, but at least by having the questionnaire, just it gives a little bit of a base just to have some form of data collection. But ideally then to have the focus group to expand upon that, and the workshop also to give back to the home still. So it is still, there is still an element of action, but as you pointed out, it's more of an intervention component.
I was just thinking, a little side note here. Claire and I did an intervention study years ago at a clinic in Mpumalanga, and we'd gone up there, we'd done a whole lot of research. We found out what are the issues around communication, what's working, what's not. We went in, we did a whole drama-based intervention, and Claire went back 6 months later to ask them, how did it go? What did you find useful from the workshop? Did you implement the principles? And the only thing I could actually remember about the intervention was the chicken lunch.
Yeah. It's nothing.
Yeah, doing fields, this kind of work in the field is not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah.
You know, I think often it's a lot more challenging, but also incredibly rewarding if you think of the
Yeah.
kinds of insights that we've been able to get with your project.
Yeah. It requires, I think, which is why, it's not mostly used because, to see the impact, the long term impact, it requires constant involvement, right? I could do this for a postdoc, maybe for a year or 2, but what happens after that?
Yeah. And I guess that principle that we love in the HCOU of slow research. So this kind of research is not quick in and out.
Yeah.
Building relationships, and Karen, I'm sure you can speak to this as well. And long term, many years, even decades of involvement with particular communities. Because how long have you been involved now with?
Since 2013, I've been involved with a community in Limpopo province. So yeah, it's a long term.
It's a very, very long term, and lots of ups and downs with funding, and
yeah, we don't have funding.
yeah, so not easy research, but I think very meaningful if one can build and design a research project that has this kind of element where the community are really speaking and voicing their concerns. Joanne and I met yesterday with a lovely group of speech therapy qualitative researchers who are mostly based in Australia, and they're very involved with Aboriginal research issues, very, very much this kind of research, so driven by what are the needs of communities. So there are people out there who are doing this research and doing it really well. So it's great to have those kind of connections as well, and to learn from others. Yeah, I don't know if there are any more comments online. Let's see where you go for it.
Morning, everyone. I found this quite. I found the article actually quite informative. I enjoyed reading it. I actually just love the idea of actually doing research with people as opposed to doing research on people. And I think this particular methodology lends itself in that aspect. I was just wondering then. So I think a big part of the research is being driven by the needs of the community. How I was just wondering, how do you then negotiate those spaces, if I may? Maybe just if you can just talk me through that process of actually engaging with the community, getting to the point where you can establish that these are the needs of the community. And how also, I think the second part of my question is, it seems like a big part of it is their involvement. So I don't know, how do you negotiate their involvement in terms of then taking that idea, so involving them in conceptualizing the idea, putting together that idea, and ultimately coming up with a research proposal. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
So yeah, ideally, one should go, into the community with like a blank slate. Unlike me, I already had a topic and a question, unfortunately. But yeah, so you go into the community with the studies that I've read, the school one, for example, the learners, they started by just having workshops where they bring together the learners at the school to talk about anything. And one of the issues that they raised was, the sanitary facilities, that their toilets were not clean, they didn't have sports grounds. And then the research question that came after that, or the topic, was how, like a safe learning environment impacts the learner's psychological development. So that's how the researchers came up with were guided by the learners in terms of what to focus on. And the action part of the research was actually also taken by the learners. So what they did, they raised funds in the community, mobilized the community members, and at the end they had volunteers who volunteered to clean the sports grounds. And by doing that, they were able to play in the fields. Another thing that they did, or another issues that they had, was having other learners loitering around the school during class, and they came up with sort of like a passport, a pass. So anyone who's outside during class times had to have that passport, and that passport can only be issued by the teacher. So yeah, these are some of the actions that they took. And yeah, most of this was guided by the learner's input instead of the researchers.
Interesting question. Yeah, it is. I think it's an interesting question, Pitsire, because, do you just go in with a blank slate, or do you have some kind of preconceived idea of what you're going to focus on? And again, coming back to Xanthia, I remember we did that one year. We went in, students did a needs analysis with a kind of blank slate approach, and we said, what do you need? And they said they needed a swimming pool so that they could train the kids to swim so they wouldn't drown in the river. And our response was, well, we can't help you with that, but this is what we can do.
You can be a library.
We can be a library. So at what point do you need to have some kind of a preconceived idea? And I guess that also depends on how much you've worked with that community before. So we want to avoid the kind of helicopter research of, well, I've arrived with my team and now we're doing research and we're here to help you. This kind of, benevolent, horrible, patron, sort of over the top kind of nonsense. Journalistic is the word I'm looking for. So I think one has to be quite careful, but if one's going in with quite a tight preconceived idea and you're not open to being flexible, then that's going to get you into trouble as well.
Yeah. So,
for example, with Sonto's project, I think it was helpful to have mental health as that's the topic of interest that we're going in with. And then to have the flexibility to shape and to redirect and to pivot when things came up that weren't what we had originally planned for. So your project changed radically as a result of that.
But in a sense, you know, you built the swimming pool because, you know, like that would horrify me if somebody said, but also with yours, if I suddenly felt, okay, now I've got to be involved in cleaning up the school grounds. But I think that the mental health or the communication, it's almost that executive system skills, like how do we go about getting this? And, you know, that empowering the community to see things happen. And I think it must have been a huge boost mental health wise to actually see noticeable changes that the children or the learners were able to implement. Because I mean, to get sports fields cleaned up and to sort out facilities is massive. And they did it and were empowered through you. So perhaps, yeah, perhaps that swimming pool thing is well, then what are the communication skills that we need to give to the community to help them achieve this?
So it's actually about so much more than the swimming pool that they've asked for. It's
to seeing what's almost
building
underneath
blocks,
it.
the foundational skills. So in Sancho's project case, it's okay, well, now we need to go back in and start getting vocabulary, working on connections, working on people feeling part of something on a much smaller scale than what we'd originally envisaged. Yeah, so sure. I can't believe our hour is up pretty much. So, I think this has been a wonderful discussion and hopefully sparked some interest in going forward with using these kinds of methods, and really thinking about some of the caveats around ethics, around do you start with a topic in mind or do you just start with a blank slate? And really just to say thank you to you, Sancho, for leading this. And it's been such an amazing learning experience for me as a supervisor to be part of this project. And I know at times it's been quite scary for you, like, but this is not what we planned. So really kudos to you to being open to shifting and pivoting. And so thanks everyone. I feel like we've got to kind of rush to close everything off now. It's been such a great discussion. But we'll catch you all hopefully next month. Thanks, Kelly, for your comment. It was a very interesting discussion. And we hope to have you join us again. So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And have a good rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Well done, Sancho.
Well done. Very interesting discussion. I'm just going to write on here.